Randolph Props has seen every kind of guest. Tall and short, rich and slightly rich, popular or low-key person, well-mannered, and people with questionable basic manners. After all, he worked in a popular hotel in Kansas City in Missouri. He probably had a glimpse of celebrities whom people only see on their televisions. He thought that he had seen it all. Until this man who checked in a day after New Year of 1935 had changed this belief. Maybe it was his cauliflower ear that looked like, well, a cauliflower. Another thing he just could not shrug off was what the man brought with him. A comb, a brush, and a toothpaste. He says he's been staying at the Muehleback Hotel, but it was too expensive. Turns out that this man named Roland Owens should have probably never left his other hotel because 2 days after he checked in, they would have to clean up tons of blood in his room at 1046. Hey, my name is Detective Maple. If you like true crime stories and unsolved mysteries, hit that subscribe button because I'm here to bring tons your way. So drape your blanket over your head and let's get spookin'. Hotel precedent in Kansas City was no place for teenage slumber parties in the early 1935s. To put it in perspective, when singer Frank Sinatra walks in, the staff aren't starstruck at all because he was irregular. He was the type of guest they'd normally see. So when Roland Owen walks into the same hotel in 1935 around 1:20 p.m., he was relatively humble considering the other guests the hotel was having. Seemingly in his early 20s to mid-30s, Owen did not stand out. He did not talk to a lot of other guests, and the only identifying characteristic they would later point out was his cauliflower ear. That says a lot because just imagine that people had to look at your ear to distinguish you from 20 other Johns they have seen in the hotel lobby. Regardless, let's just say that the dude was trained to only carry a brush, a comb, and a toothpaste in his coat pocket. Maybe he was a minimalist, trying to use as few things as possible to save up resources. By the time a maid named Mary Soptic stopped by to clean room 1046 in the early afternoon, Owen was seen fully dressed, laying on the bed. The room was lit with nothing but a dim lamp. Odd, Soptic must have thought. Maybe he was too lazy to change, or maybe he did not bring any clothes at all. Maybe the man was just not a morning person, so he just turned off the lights. Regardless, Soptic gave him the benefit of the doubt that he must have had a good reason to be found like that. As she was about to leave the room, Owen made a request that she leave the door unlocked for he was expecting a guest. Soptic obliged. However, she cannot help but remember his face struck with fear and worry when he requested that. A few hours had passed, and there was Mary again assigned to bring fresh towels to the man's room. She finds him there in the same exact unusual state. This time, there was a note on the bedside table that said, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." This gave the maid an uneasy feeling. The next morning, just around brunch, the maid returned to Roland Owen's hotel room to bring fresh towels. It's established that this guest was peculiar after a short series of interactions she had with the man. So when she realized that the room was locked from the outside, she sighed and thought, well, that's odd. This indicated that there was someone who was not Owen who locked the door from the outside. Maybe the Don he was talking to yesterday. She proceeded to knock and unlock the door. Owen was in the same position he was in yesterday. Fully clothed, laying in bed, completely dark except for a barely lit lamp. She proceeded to clean the room. While cleaning, she heard Owen talk to the mystery man once more. He said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast." For a few seconds, it was silent, and he continued to argue. "No, I am not hungry." As soon as the mysterious caller hung up, Owen began asking about her. Thankfully, he only asked the professional questions, ones relating to the hotel president and an employee like Mary. It wasn't known how much she shared or the specific things they talked about, but I would assume that she probably told him about Frank Sinatra being a regular. Whatever the maid told Owen about the hotel worked because he seemed interested in booking a few more nights. Later that afternoon, Soptic knocked into room 1046 again to bring fresh towels. She could hear two male voices talking inside. When she stated her purpose, the man with a deeper voice, who likely was not Owen's, said, "We don't need any." In the evening, the neighboring guest would later report that she heard men and women loudly talking and saying mean, unholy things. Downstairs, though, was a party where it could potentially have come from, but the woman was certain she heard it next door. On the morning of the 4th of January, the hotel's telephone operator of the hotel president noticed that the telephone in room 1046 had been off the hook for a while. So he sent Randolph Probst, the same bellhop who assisted Roland Owen, to check on the guest staying there. Walking towards the room, he sees a Do Not Disturb sign hanging from the room 1046. He knocked. No response. He knocked again, and after a few more attempts to call for attention, the man finally told him to come in. He told him to turn on the lights, but the bellhop did not have the key to be able to enter the room himself. So he just shouted for him to hang up the phone and left. Another bellhop named Harold Pike would later be sent to the room. The same Do Not Disturb sign was there, but he had a key, so he let himself in. Inside the room, it was still very dark, but he could see dark stains on the bed where the man was. For some reason, he ignored this, picked up the phone on the ground, and put it back on the stand. At 10:30 a.m., the phone was off hook again. Probst was sent to check up on him, and he learned his lesson of bringing a key. This time, he would find Roland Owens on his elbows and knees on the ground, 2 feet away from the door. There was blood all over the walls, and Owen's head was badly wounded. Horrified, he came running back down to call for help. When they came back with the assistant manager, they could not open the door because Owens was already 60 centimeters away from it, blocking people from entering the room. They did not want to push the guest when he was in that state. Thankfully, he was able to stand up on his own so they can enter and help him. He was immediately brought to the Kansas City General Hospital. He was tied up in his wrists, ankles, and neck. When the doctor and police asked him who did that to him or if he was trying to kill himself, he told them no one and that he wasn't trying to commit suicide. Instead, he said that he slipped and hit his head on the bathtub. We all know he was likely lying because his injuries were physically and psychologically impossible to have only involved himself. His neck was bruised, indicating attempted strangulation. His heart has dodged the stabs, but his lungs were punctured instead. The right side of his skull was punctured, and potentially from this blow is where the blood splatters in the ceiling came from. Shortly after, he was fully comatose and died on January 5. Back in room 1046, despite all the blood splatters even reaching as high as the ceiling, they found no murder weapon. However, they found 4 fingerprints which they assumed to be a woman's, but would prove to be of no use for the investigation yet. Having no leads after a sketch of his face was published in the newspapers, the funeral home announced that they needed space and they would bury Owens in a potter's field. The same day, the funeral home received an anonymous call from a man who said he would pay for the burial so Owens could be buried next to his sister. When asked if he knew anything about the case, he said that Owens had an affair with an engaged woman and said cheaters usually get what's coming to them, then hung up. The anonymous caller did what he said, paid for the funeral, and even sent 13 American roses signed, "Love Forever, Louise." No one else but the police and employees from the funeral home attended the service. An anonymous woman would later then fact-check the Kansas City Journal-Post on the news report, saying that Owen had a proper burial service. 1 year later, a woman named Ruby Ogletree couldn't believe her eyes when she read the American Weekly issue. She was certain that it was her son, Artemus Ogletree, aka Roland T. Owen, the unidentified man who died in the hotel president a year ago in 1935. She later contacted the Kansas City Police District to identify her son. His cauliflower ear, according to her, was from a hot grease spilled on him when he was young. Furthermore, she told them that Artemus was allegedly corresponding with her even after he was pronounced dead on the news. Postmarked in Chicago, Ruby did not buy that the letters she later received were from her son. For one, Artemus did not know how to use the typewriter, and secondly, he did not speak or write in colloquial style. It would later be traced back to have been sent from New York. The letter said that he was sailing to Europe. The other one said that he was living in Egypt, where he married a wealthy woman. The U.S. Embassy in Cairo had no evidence of him ever setting foot in the country. In 1937, Joseph Martin would be arrested for killing his roommate, whose body he was planning to ship to Memphis. Other than his handwriting matching some letters sent to Artemus Ogletree's mother after his death, his involvement in the murder and hotel president was not verified and the case went cold. Later in 2003, an unknown person called John Homer, a historian in the Kansas City Public Library, said that he was doing an inventory for an elderly person when he found newspaper clippings about the case, but this lead went nowhere. At the end of the day, a person died and his chances of getting justice depleted over time. While the investigators did not have a clear and cut answer for who and why Artemus Ogletree was killed, some people think that evidence points to an extramarital love affair gone really deadly. On the other hand, the name Don, who he was speaking to in his hotel room, is also a known term for mafia bosses. Was Artemus a liability in an illegal underground business? Or was this a case of a love affair gone deadly? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. In the next story, D.B. Cooper executed the greatest, unsolved, most notorious hijacking mystery in the FBI in American history. 51 years later, his identity remains unknown. Find out how he hijacked the Northwest Airlines Flight 305 and touched down $1.2 million richer in today's money. Until then, Puppet out!